r/r AskReddit, Halloween is approaching. Reddit, what's the scariest, creepiest, or most unexplainable thing to ever happen to you? The way my office is set up, there are a bunch of desks you have to pass before you can reach my door. Even if you skip across them, it would take you at least 3 minutes before you are out the door. So I was working in my office one afternoon. Everyone else had left already. It was Friday afternoon. I heard, clear as day, 3 distinct knocks on my door. I immediately went to see who it was. There was nobody. The hairs on my arm stood up. I thought it was weird, but maybe I was tired, so I moved on. About 2 weeks later, the same thing happened. It still happens from time to time. I just ignore it and go on. I have been told not to acknowledge spirit activity, so I guess I'm sharing an office with a knocker ghost. Unfortunately, this one turned out to be explainable, so the ending is disappointing. For the longest time I was convinced I had seen a ghost, or had some sort of out-of-body experience. I vividly remember waking up somewhere I had never been before, and a woman with long blonde hair and an old-fashioned white gown entering the room and walking toward me and calling my name. I closed my eyes in terror and kept them that way until I fell back asleep. This was my go-to ghost story for years, because I could remember every single detail and was absolutely convinced it had happened. No way it was a dream. No one else had an explanation for it either. So for over a decade I would tell people that story anytime ghostly experiences came up. And then one day I was looking through an old photo album, and I found a ghost. It was a picture of my mom's friend Lori, who lived near us. She looked differently than I was used to, because she'd always worn her hair up since I knew her, and this was an older photo. I pieced together the circumstances and learned that when my mom was pregnant with my little brother, she went into labor in the middle of the night. Before driving her to the hospital, my dad scooped me out of bed and took me to Lori's house, to look after me. I woke up confused, and Lori heard me moving and came to check on me. It was late, so she had her hair down and was in her nightgown. I was half asleep, confused to wake up in an unfamiliar place, and had never seen her like that, so I didn't recognize her. So yeah, for over 10 years I spun the memory of being babysat by a neighbor into a terrifying ghost story. Not unexplained, but still one of the creepiest things that ever happened to me. I was in bed with my boyfriend at the time in an absolutely enormous, old mansion. He was a monk and the mansion was a monastery. Long story. I woke up to the sound of screaming and moaning. I went absolutely cold. I legitimately thought there was a ghost in the room with us, or someone was possessed. When I say this place was big, I mean big. Like an English country mansion in the middle of nowhere. Most of the place wasn't even being used anymore, so my imagination was going wild with what could be happening in any one of those rooms. I quickly realized it wasn't in the room, but when it wouldn't stop I woke my boyfriend up. He was like, "Oh, that's brother so and so. He's crazy and sees angels and demons in his room at night." Didn't make me feel much better. I really felt like I was in a 1800s horror story. Anyway, I'll never forget that primal fear I woke up with. I shared this elsewhere already today, but it's perfect for here. My partner and I were driving down a steep hill in my city, myself in the passenger seat. Traffic was fairly busy as usual, as it was only about 8 p.m. and the road is one of the main routes for commuting out of the city. I'm just kinda enjoying the journey as the car was nice and warm and I was looking forward to dinner when I got home. I noticed out of the front window and to the right that somebody was about to walk in front of oncoming traffic. I panicked and shouted out loud to my partner that someone was about to get hit and potentially thrown into our path. But at the moment they were about to be hit by a small white van, their top half disappeared but their legs were still walking into the road. It is the most bizarre thing I've ever seen in my 32 years alive. The legs took a few steps forward. They weren't solid as I could see the vehicle's headlights through them, yet they weren't completely transparent. So strange. I had consumed no alcohol, no drugs, not even a paracetamol, and I wasn't tired or stressed either. Still to this day I won't go on that stretch of road. It's not scary or, to me, creepy, but it is unexplainable and supernatural. I currently live alone in my great-grandparents' house, my grandpa's childhood home. It's been in the family basically since it was built. My great-grandpa didn't die in the house, but he was rushed to the hospital from the house and eventually died. It's important to note that a lot of the original furniture is still here. So my great-grandpa was a stern but affectionate guy. He was that trope where the big tough scary dude is secretly soft for kids and animals. Above all, he was a known lover of cats. He always had at least one cat. He rescued kittens constantly. My cats always seemed to congregate where he used to spend his time. Where his chair used to be, in his old bed, at his seat at the dining room table. I've always sort of felt his presence in the house. I wasn't especially close to him because, like I said, he was a super intimidating type of dude lol, but he was kind to me and my sisters and cousins. During Hurricane Sally we lost power in my city for like a week, and on the first night, when I was trying to wait the storm out alone, super nervous, his old alarm radio came on. It was static, but it sort of sounded like a man was speaking, maybe on a talk show or something. I'm sure there's a logical explanation. I'm not tech savvy, but this radio has no battery power feature, like it has to be plugged into work, and no matter what I did to it, it wouldn't go off or turn down, even when I fucked with the volume. I started living here with my dad shortly after his death when I was about 15, and now I live here alone as an adult. I don't know if it's the memories or what, but I've never felt alone in the house, even when I for sure was. When I was 5/6 I had an invisible friend. Her name was Jen. She had curly brown hair, blue eyes, and I thought of her as my older sister. I thought she was pretty cool because I really wanted an older sister. One day I mentioned her to my mom, who freaked out and told me never to talk about Jen ever again. It honestly scared me. Jen stayed around for a while, but sort of faded after a while. It was a couple years later when I was told that before I was born, my mom had a miscarriage pretty late in pregnancy. The fetus was a girl, and would have been named Jennifer. It's totally possible I was told/overheard about the miscarriage way earlier and just don't consciously remember, but still. Scariest thing is always a phone call at 3 a.m. That being said, most unexplainable thing in my life is my father's tendency to see UFOs. Everyone in my family, including me, has seen at least one weird thing. I believe that you'll eventually see something weird if you spend enough time looking at the sky. But my father takes the cake. He's not only seen lights that move in impossible swirling patterns, but actual ships, once even two at a time, flying in a coordinated way and fairly close. He's the stereotype of the serious dad with a newspaper and a mustache. Worked in a bank his whole life, atheist, likes reading books and mowing the lawn, barely drinks beer sometimes when someone comes over. I mean, not one who would make this up. He's been both fascinated and scared because of this. I think he was also quite relieved the day that my mom was with him in the backyard and they both saw a ship, like he had a witness now. I'm sure there is some kind of explanation for this, but it was definitely creepy at the time. When I was living in my first apartment, I would sleep in the living room because for some reason the bedroom just made me feel uncomfortable. One night I was especially tired, so I fell asleep watching TV in the aforementioned bedroom for the first time in months. I wake up a few hours later in the bedroom, and it's almost pitch black and dead quiet. Which doesn't make any sense because I had fallen asleep with the TV on. Then, only a few seconds after I sit up, the TV, overhead light, and my box fan all came on at once and I bolted. Never slept in there again. Toured the Edinburgh Vaults. I've done quite a few ghost/haunted tours and never experienced anything that wasn't prompted by the company to scare me. If this company was behind it, I say hats off to you. Our guide told us the history of the vaults as we descended into the darkest areas with nothing but the candle the guide had. We stop and gather inside one of the areas, my friend on my right and a wall immediately to my left. As he told the story, I heard a scream on the left side of my head, seemed like right into my ear. But the scream was low, then got incredibly loud, then faded back out, all in a matter of 2 seconds maybe. I looked around frantically, no one was on my left or behind me and no one else in the group reacted as if they'd heard it too. I asked my friend if she'd heard it and she had no idea what I was talking about. I was on edge the rest of the night and to this day, can't explain it. This is a story of my mum's from the late 70s early 80s when she was a little girl. Mum, my aunt and my grandma and granddad were on a trip in Scotland near the Isle of Skye. They were driving on a main road and came to a little town. Can't remember what it was called, but all the houses there were small one-story white houses with straw roofs like something from the 1700s. There were no cars and everyone looked dirty and were wearing dirty old clothes that were like what peasants from the 1700s would wear. As they drove into the village, the road turned from tarmac to a dirt and pebbly track. All the people in the village gathered around the car as Granddad drove slowly through, and people began to gather round the car as it drove slowly, all holding pitchforks, iron rods, and other objects, and began bowing to the car and shouting things that sounded like prayers as it drove through. People who weren't gathering round were staring and screaming and shouting as they drove through. My mum remembers that her and her sister pulled faces and stuck out their tongues and they drove through. They assumed there was some ceremony going on and thought nothing of it except that it was strange. A little down the road they stopped for a quick break to admire the scenery. My granddad was outside looking through his binoculars when my mum remembers him suddenly screaming, "Get in the car now," in a voice that mum could only describe as terror. Well, they all got in the car and my mum remembers seeing this figure. He was in a long purple coat, had long blonde hair and a kind face. The scary thing was he didn't seem to be standing. He was hovering a few centimeters of the ground, and when you looked at him he didn't seem quite there. Like he was half there, half not. Transparent almost. My granddad peeled out and was at full throttle and approaching like 30 miles per hour, but he was still there. At my mum's window staring in. Not in a scary way but in a pitiful way. He wasn't running but floating and kept up with the car with no problem. After maybe 2 minutes if top speed, where my granddad got to like 50 miles per hour, he suddenly vanished. Like he was there then he wasn't. And it's not like he could just leap into the undergrowth because there wasn't any. After that they spent the rest of the trip inquiring people about it to see if there was any events in that area. Nobody knew of anything. And recently we looked up the town and showed mum pictures and she said it looked nothing alike to what it did on that trip. Also she looked into it and found there had been other sightings on that stretch of road in the past of a figure exactly how mum described, and even people who had drew pictures of the figure, and every single person drew and described the same figure. Some even speculated it was the ghost of Bonnie Prince Charlie, who escaped to safety on that road to the Isle of Skye wearing clothes similar to those described by my mum and other people who had seen it. So yeah, that's my mum's story, and a bloody odd one at that, lol. The road was the A75 near Kirkcudbright. The A75 is apparently the most haunted road in Scotland, which I forgot about till I looked it up again. Well, thanks.